Welcome to the Football Chris Show, where my name fits conveniently in the initials.
That was a disgusting performance.
On this show, we cover the hottest topics around the FCS each and every week.
Yeah, it's my job to get them ready. I'm running around like trying to get them jacked up.
If you could do us a favor, if you're listening in podcast form, could you please leave us a 5-star rating?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for you, bud.
I think in general it was a pretty uninspired day.
If you're watching on YouTube and Sam Herder hates your team, leave us a like and smash the subscribe button.
If you call Nick, you know you'll get cussed out on the spot. So don't do that. Treat me like Nick.
Oh, and one last thing before you enjoy the show.
One last thing, Will. Tell them to bring me my money.
This show is an affiliate show of FCS Fans Nation Network.
I'm going to be as frank as I can be. I'm glad it's over.
What is going on, FCS Fans Nation, and welcome back to this episode of the Football Chris Show. Today we're going to be talking top 25 polls, FCS stats, kind of the media poll, as it were, for our level of college football, just released today. We're also going to compare it to some of the other, popular, reputable polls as well, including the Athlon poll, the Hero Sports poll, and we're going to include FCS Fans Nation's biggest researcher on such topics, Jamie Williams's poll. If you want to see more of his poll, card up here, 130 teams. So if you want to know where your team is, if you don't see him in his 25, check it out. He goes all the way through the entire FCS. Can't plug that video enough. So how we're going to do this is I think it's interesting to take all the major polls and kind of make a combo poll or a composite poll, as it were. So I take all of their rankings and then get kind of like a standard of what the actual teams are. And that includes having for standard deviation included. So we'll know who people agree with the most and disagree with the most between the 4 polls we're going to be using today. And obviously, it's not a perfect system, as in Sam Herder, I believe Sam Herder and Jamie Williams vote in the stats poll. So their poll is already included in that overall poll with, I think, the other 50 voters they have this year. And then Athlon, I'm 95% sure, is actually just Craig Haley's personal poll, since he does the preseason stuff for them. And obviously hasn't released his stats poll yet, which he orchestrates. So really, you're looking at most likely all 3 of the polls I'm including with the stats poll are already included in the stats poll. So it's by no means perfect math. But I still think you're taking 3 reputable people in Craig, Sam, and Jamie, putting their polls together with basically more of an entire media focus. And I think you still get pretty good results, and we're going to be covering that. At the end, I'll share my top 25. It might differ a little bit from theirs, but for those of you that question it, I'll remind you to last year's video. But let's get into this, and we'll talk composite and those 4 other polls today. All right, starting with 25 through 21, you have the Richmond Spiders at 25. They actually averaged 25th, as well as Rhode Island at 24, and they actually averaged 24th. This is how I made the composite. Take their averages, and then whatever, based on averages, then rank them from that. So it's funny that these 2 teams are one of the handful that actually match their composite ranking with their average ranking. So feeling pretty confident about those guys, right? Richmond, Rhode Island, you're getting them at 25 and 24. Cal Davis at 23. Their average was a 23.75. They beat out the Mercer Bears for 22, or Mercer beat out them at 22 by 0.25. They got a 23.5. And Weber State rounds out the bottom half of the top 25, finishing 21st with a 20.75 rating. So some notable things here. The 21 through 25 spot usually gets kind of used as a statement piece, or if you're going to be more of a predictive poll, which is what my poll personally is, it's where you might think some conference champions are, because most conference champions end the season somewhere in the top 25. So that's what I think of when I'm looking at these polls here specifically. And then you look at some of the teams here that don't get picked in other people's polls, like Weber State is actually not even in the Hero Sports poll. Rhode Island is not in the Hero Sports poll, and Mercer is not in the Hero Sports poll, as well as UC Davis is not in Athlon's poll. Neither is Richmond, and Rhode Island is not in Jamie Williams's poll. So when you're looking at these top 25s, it's interesting because this is that part where you have a couple people that don't have them in their top 25, but they beat out some other teams. Like if we're just going to go down the list real quick because some of them are on the screen. Your 26th would be Dartmouth, 27 would be South Dakota. Then you have Harvard, William Mary, Eastern Kentucky, Elon. So these are teams that also received votes in a couple of the top 25s. You see them on the screen that did not make it. And in fact, Dartmouth being the most surprising, actually getting Jamie Williams' 19th pick, but not even cracking the top 25. Wow, Hero Sports had them at 23, which I think is a good transition into 20 through 16. So in the 20 through 16 spot, you have Jackson State at 20. They averaged 20.25. You have Northern Iowa at the 19 spot. They averaged 20th. You have Delaware at 18. They averaged 19th. UT Martin at 17. They averaged 18.75. You have Incarnate Word at 16th. They averaged 18, which is actually tied. So you have a tie technically at 15 with Southeastern Louisiana. I end up putting Southeastern Louisiana ahead of Incarnate Word, which I know I'm breaking into the 15th spot here, specifically because Jamie Williams does not have Incarnate Word in his poll at all, where Southeastern Louisiana was included in all the other all four polls. So I gave them the slight editor's choice nod to make the top 15 as compared to Incarnate Word. We kind of touched on there, the big one being Incarnate Word not making Jamie Williams' poll, but it's not the only team on this list that was left out of a poll completely. Athlon did not include UT Martin. So we have two here in the 20 through 16 spot that actually aren't included in all four of these major reputable polls. So it's interesting when you see that, and it goes to show how four different people essentially or associations can view something so different. Now the big one on misses is obviously going to be the stats poll because there's 52 people that vote in it. So when people aren't voting in the stats poll for a team, it's a more commonly accepted probably ranking, where when you don't have like Incarnate Word, it's probably because Jamie Williams, which I'm more on Jamie Williams's page here. They lose Cameron Ward. I would be skeptical to put them as high as what Hero has them at 12. But that said, I'm also not going to underestimate the work that Daniel and Sam and whoever was a part of the Hero polls took place in. So let's move on to 15 through number 11. You have Southeastern Louisiana, which I already touched on, averaged an 18. They come in at your 15 spot. Their low was 20. High was 20. Their low was 16. Holy Cross, shocker for me that they were ranked as high as they are. They come in at the 14 spot, averaging a 16.75 placement, beating out Eastern Washington. Losing to. I keep reading these like, and you remember it's golf, right? The other way. They just lose out to Eastern Washington, who gets the 13 spot with a 16 average placement. Their high is 18 and their low is a 13. The Chattanooga Mocs come in at 12 with an average of a 14.25. And East Tennessee State comes in at number 11 with a 10.25, which once again is actually tied with our number 10 spot, which I'll get to. But when we look at the 10 spot, this is where we get into the standard deviation part, which is also part of the way we looked at the Southeastern part. Put in perspective, our 10 spot has a 0.5. Our 11 spot, which is tied with them in average ranking, has a 5.73. That's a large standard of deviation. To go back to the other example, Incarnate Word had an 8.1. In Southeastern Louisiana, only had a 1.8. So some of this is going more people believe they're around this spot is also part of the way I'm breaking up these ties using the editor's choice feature to not have ties in my rankings. Like the Hero Sports team did have a few ties in theirs. Notable ones here. I mean, you'll see it here in a little bit, but two more polls for now. Hero Sports has ETSU all the way up at 5th. Jamie Williams had him at 7th, and then they have it as low in the Athlon poll as 18. So they come in at 11, which is right where Stats had them. I think that's a big one. I think the interesting takeaway from this particular one is that Chattanooga, which you can kind of see in our SoCon preview episode, is actually picked above ETSU by the coaches and media polls in the Southern Conference. But here in the national poll, it appears more people have faith in the Buccaneers than they do the Mocs, which for me was a rather large takeaway in terms of, assessing the top 25. Is in the top 25 ranking, ETSU is ahead of Chattanooga, where in the SoCon, it was pretty not super close that Chattanooga was voted ahead of ETSU. Shocker here for me is Holy Cross. I know they're probably going to have a good season to make the playoffs, but I mean, I agree more with Jamie Williams having them at 23 than I do Athlon having them at 11. But once again, that's the beauty of polls, especially preseason polls. None of them mean anything. Let's roll into 10 through 6 here real quick. Getting into your top 10, right? The big hitters. We'll spend a little bit more time on each of these teams. So Stephen F. Austin, one of my surprise picks last year, a team I was very high on, a team that I got a lot of flack for last year, having them, I believe, ranked like somewhere probably between 14 and 17, maybe in my poll. And I got a lot of flack from people saying, like, I don't get why Stephen F. Austin, you have them ranked so high. This year, they average a 10.25. As we covered, only a 0.5 differentiator there in terms of standard deviation. Gets in the 10 spot. The only poll that did not have them at 10 is Hero Sports, who had them at 11. So you're looking at a team that almost unanimously was picked as the top 10 team this year. I think that's huge. They've got a lot coming back. They're going to have some extra motivation under them with Sam Houston State leaving the FCS to be a part of the FBS. I think they really want to step into those shoes. They also probably want to beat their rival out there, which is also a great point to cover. Sam Houston State, you'll notice, isn't in. It's on a couple of the screens right now, but they're not actually being mentioned in this poll. That's because, as I mentioned, Stats is not including them in their polls because they're not eligible for the playoffs. They have extra scholarships and all that stuff. So I decided to kind of follow the Stats route because Stats was not including them, which, as I mentioned, means Athlon's not including them. So it was weird having like Hero Sports and Jamie having them in their top 10s, and then Athlon and Stats not having them at all. It just made the ranking a little bit too hard. So basically, yes, Richmond, UC Davis, and Rhode Island, I believe, are the biggest benefactors of that because I think on how the averaging worked out, they were about the 23 spot, which 22, 23 spot, which goes to show like Sam Houston State is better than 22, which is why I just, in all honesty, couldn't put that out there into the world as an actual thing for people to accept, is that Sam Houston State is the 22nd best team in the country. So I just removed them. I'm going by the Stats and Athlon poll. So I include them in theirs because I have no way to subject them out of Jamie and Heroes. Well, I do with Jamie's because I have all 130, but Hero Sports just gave based on alphabetical teams to watch. Just figure it's easy to remove them. I'll show where they were in people's rankings, but I adjusted the composite ranking accordingly. Next up, you have Sacramento State. They averaged an 8. These next ones are all within 0.5 of each, or actually all within 1 of each other, the next 4, which is crazy. It goes to show how close 6 through 9 is. You have 8.75 for Sacramento State. You have an 8.5 average for Villanova, who comes in on the composite at 8. At 7, you have Southern Illinois, who comes in with an 8.25. And then at 7.75, to round out, 10 through 6, you have the Kennesaw State Owls, who a lot of people have to take a big step forward. I think it's hard to go wrong here. You notice some of the noticeable misses from here, like ETSU is included on the Hero Sports and also in Jamie Williams's, but they were all the way 2 whole slides ago for Athlon. That's kind of the main one where obviously people kind of disagree a lot, which to me, I think is kind of funny because like we mentioned, like Chattanooga is being viewed as the heavy favorite in the SoCon. Then when you look at the top 25, I mean, people have a lot of faith. Just comparing ETSU, ETSU gets as high as a 5 vote, where Chattanooga's highest vote was a 12. ETSU's lowest vote is an 18 at Athlon, and Chattanooga's lowest vote is a 17. So you're looking at 12 and 5 to 17 and 18. It's crazy how close these 2 in-state teams are. But then in their own media days, the coaches and media viewed them as pretty well separated, even though they were the 1 and 2. But I just find that to kind of be the interesting one is that as we play through the season, is seeing who was more right, the coaches and media that follow the SoCon or the national media who are covering it in terms of the top 25 vote. Moving on to your 5 through 1. 5 through 1, you have Missouri State coming in at 5 with an average of a 6.25. You have Montana State at a 3.75. You have Montana at a 3.25 coming in at 3. And then at 2, you have South Dakota State and North Dakota State, who are your only unanimous picks for the whole thing. Almost Montana State, but Hero kind of messed it up for Montana State and Montana because they kind of flopped those two where everybody else had on the other way, which, that's the beauty of polls, right? It's cool to see that the top 5 is pretty well, mashed out. I mean, you have Missouri State getting 2 5-place votes and then a 6 and a 9, because the 9 being Jamie Williams, kind of having them out. Then you look at the teams he has in front of him: Kennesaw, Southern Illinois, ETSU. There's not really teams you can complain at the end of the year might not finish ahead of Missouri State, but it's who he did take going into where we currently are with Missouri State. Another big one is obviously North Dakota State and South Dakota State sweeping the 1 versus 2. It definitely seems like we're being set up for another great Dakota marker game, also being set up for a potential national title game of rivals. I mean, you look at Montana State, North Dakota State, South Dakota State. It's fun seeing 2 rivals basically represent, next to each other spots in the top 4. It's safe to say any of these teams are national championship contenders in the 4 through 1 spot. North Dakota State probably being the solidified, going to make it pending massive mistakes or injuries or lapses of judgment. I don't even know what it would take at this point to get North Dakota State out of Frisco. It's not the spring season. There's no transition really this year. I don't see how they don't finish number 1. That said, I'm sure they'll slip up somewhere during the season. People will be like, see, we told you. But end of the year through the playoffs, I would expect them to get back to Frisco. I would bet a condo on them making it to the semifinals. South Dakota State, obviously the next up contender with Mike Gronowski coming back. But then also Montana reloads. You've got Montana State basically reloading. What that game could have been with Tommy Mellott at Frisco is something that's been discussed about. The Big Kid Show has pretty well put that to rest, saying like Montana State's offense wasn't necessarily the problem. It was their defense. So Tommy Mellott or not, they couldn't stop North Dakota State, which was part of the problem. And also they were just getting dominated in the trenches. So I know Tommy Mellott coming back is big. It makes it maybe a little interesting that Montana got voted ahead of Montana State. But once again, they both have a small deviation. Most people agree on where they're placed. Most people think Montana is going to be better than Montana State this season. But that said, I mean, we're talking 0.5 difference. Like it's a pretty close battle. And as the year goes on, it's kind of the opposite where Montana started to look better. And I think that's why they're carrying the momentum through this bit of the season with the polls. Let's get the boring part out of the way, the fun, boring part. What schools do people agree on their ranking the most? Now, this is using standard deviation. If you don't know what standard deviation is, take a stats class, go ask for a refund from your college or high school, really. I don't know. Like, it's basically a point value assigned based on rankings in terms of the different. This is a terrible description of this, but basically, the higher the number means the more people disagree on their placement. The closer the number, aka North Dakota State and South Dakota State being 0, because they were both voted 1 and both voted 2, everybody agrees. So the lower the number, the more people agree on their placement. The higher the number, the more disagreeful, that's not a word, the more people disagree on where they should be placed in terms of the ranking. So before we get into the most disagreed, comment down below your favorite poll, what you think's the most accurate between Stats, Hero, Athlon, and Jamie Williams. And then I want to hear what schools you guys think are the most disagreed upon school before we get to that slide. So you can type that out while you listen to me talk about the most agreed upon school. North Dakota State and South Dakota State got one. Obviously, everybody agreed they were number 1 and number 2. Nobody disagreed. Montana State, Montana, and Stephen F. Austin tie for like the second most. I'm not doing this like a traditional ranking. I'm just reading them. That we don't need ties. It just includes more schools, which makes it more fun because we get to talk about more programs. The fun thing about Stephen F. Austin is, remember, everybody had them at 10, except I believe Hero again, which had them at 11. And checking my math on that, it was indeed Hero who had them at 11. Everybody else had them at the 10 spot. Coming in at 3 is Kennesaw State with a 1.26. Then Southeastern Louisiana with a 1.83. What's interesting about that is this is the first and only team that will be mentioned that actually was outside of the top 10. As we touched on, Stephen F. Austin at 10, North Dakota State at 1, South Dakota State at 2, Montana State at 3 and 4, Kennesaw State at 6, Missouri State was your 5 spot here and your 5 spot in the ranking with a 1.89. So Southeastern Louisiana is actually one of the most agreed upon schools outside of the top 10. Southeastern Louisiana finished 15th and had an average of an 18. Hero had them at 20. Athlon had them at 19. STATS had them at 17. And Jamie Williams had them at 16. So all within 4 placements of each other. It's one of the only schools, other than their actual ranking, that put them all on one slide, where I didn't have to have like a carryover slide. So Southeastern Louisiana, pretty well agreed upon to be the 15th most consistently ranked school, according to, well, everybody that's being included in these polls. Now let's move on. I know you guys already got your answers down. If not, hit pause. We're going to move on to the least agreed upon schools in the FCS in terms of their rankings. So remember, these are all just taking it. This is no longer the composite ranking. This is just Athlon, etc. Least agreed upon, coming in at the 5 spot. So this is going to mean that they are the most agreed upon of the least agreed upon, if that makes sense. So they are more agreed upon than the schools ahead of them, but also are very well considered in the bottom 5 in terms of where people agree they'll be. Starting with Cal Davis, they get a 6.29 composite ranking. They ended up coming in at 23 in the poll with a 23.75 rating, getting rated 25th by Hero, not ranked by Athlon, 25th by STATS, and 15 by Jamie Williams. So there you can kind of see the difference, not being included in a poll, and 2 of them having them at 25, and then basically Jamie Williams having them as high as 15. Did a lot to get UC Davis towards the top of the least agreed upon schools. Followed by another Big Sky school, you have the Weber State Wildcats. Now, Weber State's kind of an interesting case here. They come in at 21. They had a rating of 6.99, so just below that 7 mark. They came in 21st, averaged at 20.75. Hero did not have them ranked. Athlon had them as high as 13. STATS had them at 20, and Jamie Williams had them at 20. So when you see we're back-to-back polls now where 2 people actually agree with their placement within the 20s, but somebody has them completely out of the polls, and somebody else has them significantly higher. UC Davis being 15 in Jamie's poll, and Weber State being 13 in Athlon's poll, mean that they're not super agreed upon because 2 organizations for both of those 2 schools have them ranked pretty dang high, top 15 type schools, and then another program considers them not even in the top 25, which moves into more of our larger disagreed upon schools. Rhode Island gets a standard deviation of 7.66. Rhode Island sneaks into the top 25 at the 24 spot. Would have been the 25 spot if it wasn't for removing of Sam and Houston. They averaged to 24. Like I said, you would think the average and where they placed, I mean, their standard deviation is similar, right? No, because that's not how standard deviation works. They had a 7.66, and they were ranked not ranked by Hero Sports. They're ranked 14th by Athlon. They're ranked 22nd by STATS, and also not ranked by Jamie Williams. So now this one's controversial because you have Rhode Island, the Rams, who are not included in 2 polls, Heroes and Jamie Williams is. And then Athlon has them as high as a top 15 team coming in at their 14 spot. This is how you get a 7.66. When you have two people not even including them, the stats poll has them as a low 20s team, and then one team has them as a top 15. It creates a high standard deviation. I don't know why I'm trying to teach math while I'm also trying to cover polls, but that's just where we're at. At number 2, you have UT Martin, the Skyhawks. They get a 7.8, so just barely less agreed upon than Rhode Island. And when you look at that, you go, why? They are number 17. They had an average of an 18.75. Hero had them at 14. Athlon did not rank the Skyhawks. Stats had them at 18, and Jamie Williams had them as high as 13. So that's your differential. You have 13, and then you have 30. And then even between that, you have 18 and 14, which honestly, when looking at this, I'm actually surprised that's how these numbers shook out. Because like I said, when you actually look at this, you would assume that that Rhode Island difference seemed larger to me. And I guess we're talking, 0.15, 1.17, whatever it is, 1.8, 1.9. We're talking point numbers here on the difference, but UT Martin just becoming the second least agreed upon school in the top 25 for the preseason. And number 1 is Incarnate Word. The Cardinals actually have an 8.16. This one is one of those ones that I kind of touched on when we were going through it all. And that doesn't shock me because I strongly disagree with where they ended up. They ended up at 16. They averaged an 18. Like I said, I ended up giving Southeastern Louisiana the nod over them because Southeastern Louisiana's standard deviation was 1.8. And Incarnate Words was 8.1. 8.2 technically if I rounded up, but I didn't. Which it's just so large is why I put Southeastern ahead of them. They were ranked 12th by Hero, 16 by Athlon, 14 by Stats, and not ranked by Jamie Williams. I think the 8.6, it goes to show that even with these standard deviations, there's not a lot of people that have somebody ranked at 9 and then nobody has, leave somebody off. I believe this Incarnate Word is probably the highest you're going to see, ranked as high as 12 and then not ranked. I don't see any other 30s. So yeah, that is your team that gets the highest poll ranking in terms of being towards the top 10, getting a 12 spot, and then somebody not even including them. So that's where I think Incarnate Word is, and I don't disagree with it. I'm sure Hero, Athlon, and Stats disagree with it because they all had them almost as a top 15 team, and Jamie Williams did not. So just goes to show maybe if I did not include Jamie Williams' poll, it'd be a different story for Incarnate Word, but it's hard to find somebody in this business that does as much research as Jamie Williams, doing a straight 1 through 30 and integrity in doing their release show on the Big Boy Show about all 1 through 130. So he explains his rationale behind all of it. That's something you don't get from every voter. In fact, you get it from 3 of the stats voters. So I appreciate Jamie, and because of that, I'm including him. And it's my show, so I get to include whoever the hell I want. But that's your least and most agreed upon schools. Now, we'll share my top 25, which if you don't care for, just skip to the end so you get more recommended videos. I'm going to kind of fly through it, but I will stop on teams I think need a little bit of explanation. Before we get into this, I just touched on it. All these guys who have polls released, I don't think a lot of people understand the difficulty it is to go into a poll. The preseason poll is actually the easiest poll, in my opinion. It's every week after that, justifying losses versus unlosses, especially with our FCS stuff. So as these season goes on, just remember that you're not going to agree with everybody's poll, and sometimes there is a weird science that goes into it where you can't just drop a team from 9 to out of the top 25 because they lose one game, right? It's weird when you try to do this weekly, and I challenge everybody at home. I'll try to do a top 25 show probably for the year. Post your top 25s on there every week and just kind of see how hard it is to track a top 25 every week. So before you just go ripping them for how dumb they are, just keep that in mind. Now you can rip me for how dumb I am because I'm confident in my polls, baby. I make some stances that are unpopular, I would say, but like I said, I go for more of a predictive poll where teams will finish at the end of the season or when we go into the playoffs necessarily. That's more my goal. I don't try to go yes, I think North Dakota State is the best team, which I do. So not number one, but let's say I don't think Chattanooga is the 12th best team. I think Chattanooga might finish 12th. So keep that in mind when we go through my poll. And if I upset you, I apologize. I'm looking at you, Jackrabbit fans. I'm the only person out of the polls I just covered that has the Jackrabbits at 4. We'll get to more of that later, but I just know they're the big middle logo. So the people watching on YouTube probably noticed that first. 25, I have Dartmouth. 24, Rhode Island. 23, Northern Iowa. 22, Mercer. I'm expecting big things out of Mercer. I thought that before our SoCon preview show, and I felt, refined in that decision after the SoCon preview. Richmond at 21. I'm not going to lie. Jamie Williams kind of talked me into that one by just like hearing him talk about how he thinks Richmond's going to have a good year. Kind of made me start looking into it. I agree. Here's one that nobody else had. I have North Dakota. I think North Dakota's this one last year that was super controversial because I had North Dakota, I think, at 25. And everybody's like, how do you have North Dakota at 25? Just the season before, you called them number 1. I literally said because they went on the road for like every difficult game they had to play, and they played all the difficult teams. I said, I don't think they're going to finish in the top 25. They didn't, but I put them at 25 because I knew that I would get even more outrage if I didn't include them. So I included them at 25 and literally said, but I don't expect them to be. And they weren't. So I felt validated in that. This year, it's the opposite. They have a lot of the tougher games at home or dodged. I still don't think they're a top 15 program or 10 or 5, but I think they might be able to sneak into the top 20 because they might beat one of those big couple teams we're going to talk about from the Missouri Valley this year. The UT Martin Skyhawks. This one I debated for a while. They did end up making my poll and actually climbed up higher than I thought they would. I think I started them at 23. They made it all the way up to 19. Jackson State. This is unpopular. I already know that people are going to be upset because a lot of people just, you can't have an HBCU in your top 25 because they don't play in the playoffs. They probably said the same thing. I blew over Dartmouth, but guys, they have one of the top recruiting classes ever. They have one of the most electric coaches ever. They have the number 1 recruit from last season. I'm not saying that means they're going to be automatically good, but telling me that they don't deserve a top 25 spot over some of the teams behind them, let alone some of the teams that aren't ranked on this list, are just like, sorry, like if you're asking me who I think is a better football program and who will probably finish in the top 25 at the end of the year, Jackson State or South Dakota, Jackson State. It's not even a question for me. So I actually feel like I have them too low at 18. I think I started them all the way at the 13 spot. And then just literally, it's funny when you're talking this out to yourself, and I guess people are listening, I feel more confident having them higher, but I let the, narrative, I was like, oh, well, I have to do it. Otherwise, people will think my poll sucks, which I don't care. So maybe Jackson State I've already underestimated, but good. Use it as bulletin board material. East Tennessee State at 11 or 17. 16, I have the Weber State Wildcats, followed by at 15, the Eastern Washington Eagles. I expect a bit of a drop-off from the Eagles. I expect a bit of a pickup from the Wildcats. That said, Eagles drop-off is the 15 spot. Obviously, I'm a Vandal, so I make jokes about the Eagles all the time, but they are a top program in the FCS. I do think that they're going to be able to find a quarterback to fill in the shoes of Eric Berrier. Just probably not a top 10 program this year. They still have a lot of wide receiver talent. They still have some running backs, and their lines just keep getting bigger and more talented. So I expect a lot from the Eagles. But that said, I do think they're outside the top 10. Southeastern Louisiana, I have them at 14, which is actually would have been the highest out of any of the other 4 polls that we listed. I have Delaware at 13. Team that I feel less and less confident being there. I actually think Jackson State might be better than Delaware, so maybe I should have Jackson State at my 13 spot, but I'm sticking with what I have on paper at the moment. Chattanooga at 12. I have UC Davis at 11. I know that's the highest anyone put them. I'm a big believer in Dan Hawkins. I think that team has a lot of talent they recruited. They've got some transfers in. I got to walk their campus this year and see their awesome new football facilities that they've been building. That's just a program on the rise. Maybe my recency bias of visiting there and kind of being there during spring practice time and getting to peek through a fence hole at spring practice has them a little higher. But they feel like my Stephen F. Austin from last year, where a lot of people said I was dumb for having them this high. But I actually think UC Davis could be that team. That is my Stephen F. Austin from last year. I might be a little off on where they finished, but I expect a lot of people to have them close to here going into next season. So I'm keeping them in my 11th spot. Then I have Stephen F. Austin, who I actually probably like to switch, but too late. It's on paper. 9, Villanova. 8, Sac State. And God, I just don't believe Sac State's very good, but they keep proving me wrong. So I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and admit it and put them as a top 10 program. 7, Missouri State, the Fighting Bobby Petrinos, take a small step back this year. But I expect them to still be a solid playoff team and probably a seeded playoff team. Kennesaw State, a team I've been low on the last couple of years, has really started a resurgency campaign. And I think that they're fair to have it as a 6th spot. This is where the controversy starts. I actually wanted Southern Illinois at my 4th spot. I think they have a way easier schedule. I don't have the schedules pulled up in front of me, but you guys can do your own research or I'll pop them on the screen. I just think their schedule is easier. They get a bye before North Dakota State, where South Dakota State literally plays the other 3 Dakotas in a row. They also have their bye week as the last week of the season, the Jackrabbits do. Like I said, Southern Illinois is before NDSU, and I believe it's at home. Like, I wanted to do it. Gronowski coming back was a big reason. I was like, okay, they lost a lot of their offensive staff. They lost some pieces on the offensive line, but they kept some major contributors on the offensive line. I ended up like coin flipping this essentially to the Rabbits. And I realized that everybody else has them as a 2, and I would be ostracized probably for having them outside of it. But last year I got a lot of hate for putting them at 5, and they finished, about 5. I'm sure at some point I'll have my poll or a link to last year's video on here somewhere so people can see where I had them ranked. 3, I have the Grizz. 2, I have Montana State. This is one where I kept flopping. I just think with Tommy Mellott back and getting a full season, plus Isaiah Fonse back, I know they lose Troy Anderson and some defensive parts, but I just think defense isn't necessarily the problem. I know it was against North Dakota State, but the problem beating the rest of their schedule, I think it's a team that has been built on defense since the Jeff Choate era, and Vegan hasn't totally cycled that out yet. He was brought in to figure out the offense, which seems to be what he did last year, in making their offense good enough that they finally cracked into the finals. I just expect Montana State to take another step forward, where the Grizzlies is not a shot against them. It's just I'm still not certain on quarterback. They lose contributors like Sammy Cam. It's not that they're bad. Like I said, this was another coin flip for me. It easily could have been the Grizz. I had the Grizz there for a while, and then I just kept seeing like Tommy Mellott, Big Sky, player of the year or quarterback returner of the year. Isaiah Fonse, it wasn't player of the year. It was a freaking UC Davis's Alonzo Gilliam. But like Isaiah Fonse and Mellott got the running back and quarterback spots. And so I'm like, okay, well, they have a lot of returning talent. Why would I put the Grizz in front of them? It'll probably bite me in the butt because I do think the Grizz can probably go further in the playoffs, but I don't know. It's a poll, and that's what it is. And then obviously the Bison, that's pretty boring. North Dakota State wraps it up and probably wins. But that is creation of a composite poll. All the 4 major polls that I think are the major polls, and my very own poll, which wasn't included in that because I understand I'm more of an optimist, underdog, thrill seeker kind of individual. But that's my rankings. Let me know where I was right, where I was wrong, who you thought was the least. And we're going to bring back some conference previews the rest of the week. We're trying to do some daily content, so check it out. Leave us a like and sub, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Hey, thank you guys so much for making it to the end of this video. Us here at FCS Fans Nation Network are pushing 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube page. We really want to get there. If you've made it this far, you might as well hit the subscribe button in the middle of the screen or down below. We would really appreciate it. And while you're at it, there's a couple other videos up on the screen. Might as well give them a listen too. You don't know who else on the network you'll like.